Welcome back to Too Much Cowboy, a backtrack mini-series where I challenged 5 of the most talented media writers I know to have the most interesting conversation about the least remarkable Star Wars film, Solo: A Star Wars Story. This third episode delves deep into the strange politics of droid revolutions, indigenous coding, and just what the hell Sabbac has to do with the rest of our story. Hey guys, welcome back to Backtrack Behind the Creators, the only show on the internet to talk about Solo for, I guess, 4 consecutive weeks now, depending on how these drop. This week, I'm once again joined by my good friend, the esteemed co-host of A Method to the Madness, Patrick Lovern. What's up, Pat?
Hey, not much, man.
Not much.
Thanks for having me on.
I'm enjoying that esteemed is becoming part of your moniker.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, we should put that on the business card or something.
We should.
Yeah,
that's a good idea. Yeah.
Get you some business cards. We're once again joined, as always, by Danielle from Level Story. What's up, Danielle?
Hey, David. Thanks for having me today.
And once again, the house is full. We've brought in the big guns, the big Star Wars guns, the big Star Wars blasters.
The Death Stars?
We got the big Death Stars in the... Should have prepared this bit before we hit record. We got Darth from YouTube. What's up, Darth?
Hey, guys.
And once again, we have Rybold back in the house. What's up, Ry?
Thank you. Good to be back.
So where we left off last time is we were talking about, we were kind of working through the plot of Solo kind of beat for beat. We lingered a lot on the introduction because that is the setup for the rest of the story and is where a lot of the failures kind of seed and then find themselves filtering through to the rest of the movie. As a reminder, basically the part of the plot we were up to talking about was where our crew, consisting of Han and Chewbacca and Tobias, they're on Voss's Dryden Voss's big kind of space yacht in his little fancy party. We've just reconnected with Kira, and they've agreed to go on the Kessel Run to extract some unrefined coaxium from the mines of Kessel. And they need to, in fact, get it back to a processing plant within like a certain amount of time because it's unrefined, it's unstable. And this mission to go and recover this fuel, I thought was a really good opportunity to talk about something that I've noticed is a real focal point of this film. I did mention it last time, but there are a lot of parallels in this film between the way that it deals with things like currency and fuel, and then also its kind of Western inspiration. I alluded to it last time, but it does wear its Firefly influence very large on its sleeve, Firefly, the TV show, even to the point where we were discussing if we had cut the film and opened with the muddy kind of trench warfare, this kind of trench space warfare. That is actually how the show Firefly starts. And it's how you get introduced to your core crew members. If they'd opened the film that way, then it almost plays out beat for beat like the first episode of Firefly, as if it were a movie. So I thought it was a good opportunity to kind of discuss some of the influences here and the implications of using them. So I wanted to start with reading a bit of a quote for you guys just to kind of get a little bit of perspective. So in Bullet Points Monthly, Vivian Chan, when she's writing about The Last of Us Part 2, is talking about the way that the iconography of Western frontierism is often used to denote a sense of like imperial and patriotic safety and security. In that game, for those of you familiar with it, the town of Jackson is this kind of like very Western frontier, new world, safe, good place. You know, it's got like a cozy bar with batwing doors. There's wooden houses, men with guitars, there's straw hats. Everybody's wearing kind of the plaid shirts. Everybody has like a lumberjack and an air of like this kind of new frontierism to them. But I think crucially, and this is where there is an overlap with Solo, crucially when you introduce these elements, you also introduce with it the tools of the West. And this is really where Solo kind of finds itself a little bit at a crossroads with its introduction of different concepts. So in that article, in Chan's own words, I'll just read you a bit of an extract here. Quote, "Cowboys are finally back, and their endless arsenal with them. The premise that support both prepper fantasies and suburban paranoia is the same. Protect your own, enforce your borders, shoot first, and check the bodies later. It's what drives our protagonists to do the violence they do, and it sits quietly in the background of even the game's most peaceful scenes and its most communal spaces." End quote. And in my opinion, it's here that Solo squints at not just its setting, but its themes. So we talked about it a little bit. I think all the three of us, me, Ry, and Darth, we kind of talked about it before in our email chains as we were prepping for this kind of mini-series, but the introduction of coaxium as starship fuel is weird to me because of everything I've just talked about. So you have the tools of the West, right? Han gets this dope blaster, and we get all of these framed shots like they're from a Clint Eastwood movie where, you know, he steps into frame and he's kind of got his legs planted and he's got his hand on his belt, you know, and he's going to pull the blaster out and do the quick fire. You know, there are all these Western influences that it's wearing, and with it brings the oil of the Star Wars universe, which is coaxium. So it makes sense to me that this space Western story focuses on a natural resource as its object of desire, because if you're going to take the tools and the kind of trappings of the West, why not take the resources with them? I think my issue here, and this is where I want to get your guys' kind of opinion as we set the tone for this episode, is if this is the focus, right? The focus here is the systematic kind of push and pull of you have this occupying force taking this natural resource to do something with it, which is a systematic demand, right? But the film frames it as an interpersonal conflict. Voss, Beckett, and Han deal with coaxium as a slight amongst peers, while the larger narrative treats it as this kind of like systematic pressure where, you know, it's like, oh boy, if we don't recover enough coaxium, then the deal's bust, and then, you know, this trade organization isn't going to be able to make its deal with the Empire, and it's going to have all these systematic implications. But the three of our protagonists, or the three of our kind of key core cast members, treat it like it's an interpersonal conflict, as if you know, not only does Han occupy the role of the capitalist here, claiming these natural resources, but he also carries a pistol and rebels against the oppressive Empire. He's almost this. He's the classic cowboy. He's both a hero and a victim of society, or the societization of the West, or as the West is ending. Han is this halcyon of the West, right? He is the last kind of great, and Beckett embodies this as well, that they're kind of the last cowboys in some sense before the Empire finally closes in, and we kind of get what follows, which is kind of the next trilogy where the Empire truly takes over. And it's almost, if you were going to sit down with a textbook and be like, how would you recreate the West in space? These are all of the things I would check off my list on that kind of box. But it introduces this issue that I know that Darth, we kind of talked about a little bit, which is like, what's the fucking deal with coaxium? And why is this the first time we're hearing about it?
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing that is not just relegated to Solo. Because I was thinking about that from The Mandalorian, which I'm not sure if everyone is fully up to date on that, but there was a lot that, I mean, yes, he's a bounty hunter and he's just trying to deal with how do I make money and how do I live, but a lot of the time he's saying we are low on fuel, I need money for fuel. He's not saying I need money for food, I need money for better weapons or something. It seems to very frequently come down to needing money for fuel. And then you look at further comparisons of how that is very much presented as a Western as well. You have the same kind of stances of him having that gun on his hip. Mm-hmm. He's got the same kind of fast firing. The music, even more specifically, has that same kind of da-da-da-da-da, you know, yeah. It sounds so much like a Western, even more than the Solo soundtrack does.
More so,
but yeah, it's really weird that they patterned both of those so much after Westerns. And one thing that I'm starting to think about, and this is getting away from the fuel question a little bit, but is Westerns, to me, feel safe. Because it's something that we're very, very familiar with. At least that may be more of an American thing, but it's something that we're very familiar with, the Western and the lone gun, and it's not a mystery. So for Disney, who has never really known what to do with the Star Wars franchise after they got it, half the time they're disappointing people, half the time people are kind of just meh, this is okay. So going with that Western motif feels like just a safe choice for them to be making.
That is an interesting point. It does. Yeah, I mean, The Mandalorian's a great comparison point. I think The Mandalorian leans into it even more so, right? It's even framed like cowboy dime novels are, where each episode is him getting on his horse and riding to the next village and encountering whatever problem is to be found there, right? This is classic video game RPG structure. This is like Fallout 2 in a nutshell, which is another game that relies on Westerns a lot. Where it's like there is a structural simplicity to Westerns that let you do these kind of complex stories with very simple easy to understand kind of conflicts within certain areas. Like, so, in The Mandalorian, he arrives at a location. I'm thinking specifically of the episode where we get the Boba Fett armor reintroduced, right? He arrives to a town. It's the most Western episode of the show, right? He arrives at a town. They have a problem. They have something he wants. He's going to help them solve the problem in exchange for the thing he wants. There are complications, but he ultimately gets what he wants, right? And then there are further like story implications, right? Boba Fett we get reintroduced to. We get our next kind of where to go next, where the Mandalorians are. Like it does all the things it needs to do, but it's a very, very simple plot structure. And I think Solo wanted to be that very badly, but it gets bogged down in a lot of this, like, I don't know, that stuff works because that town and its problem is really isolated. Like this giant sand dragon thing has nothing ostensibly to do with the Empire or Tatooine as a whole or the economy. It's just like a local issue that they're dealing with. It's like the geckos in the cave nearby the town in Fallout 2, and you go and kill the geckos. It's not affecting like the Enclave or the broader story. It's just like a thing to be solved. Whereas I think Solo wants a lot of this stuff to be interwoven and systematic, where it's like, yeah, this Dryden Voss dude is working for this huge, or he runs this Crimson Dawn thing, and they secretly work for the Empire, and then Kira is the apprentice of Darth Maul, and like it wants all these threads to kind of come together, and it ends up feeling like I don't know, is forced the right word? It just feels canny to me. Like it feels obvious in some ways.
I think I understand what you're saying, and it's one of the issues that people have highlighted about the current season of Mandalorian, which is if you look at the first season of Mandalorian, it's very much an isolated story, which is what makes it more interesting, because that's not something we've seen very much of. Whereas in the second season, we're taking this smaller isolated story and tying into the characters that we already know and the much bigger story of Star Wars. And that's what you get with Darth Maul, and that's coming in at the end of this. But we're getting a little bit ahead of things there.
I think this film, or like Kathleen Kennedy, like whoever's in charge of the movies, they conflate gravitas with scope, and like the Mandalorian has like a gravitas because the scope is with the characters, whereas like I think they think that the scope in the movies has to do with what you're saying, like this interconnected system of references, and it all fundamentally comes back to the genetically destined bloodline of the Skywalkers and stuff like that, which the Mandalorian also does at the end of that season. But yeah, it feels the need to just like connecting things to what has already been established, and therefore constantly expanding it.
And I think because this story is absent us giving a shit about the characters, this is a way to force us to care, right? It's like, well, you give a shit about Star Wars. This has a bunch of Star Wars stuff in it. And it's like, yeah, I care about... Well, actually, I don't really give a shit about the Star Wars universe. What I care about is the characters in it. And you're right. That's such an interesting... that connects some dots for me in my head of like, yeah, they're sort of going... Absent being able to create characters that we're super invested in this story, the alternative is like, I guess, presenting us with, hey, look at how this fits into stuff you already know, and look at the far-reaching consequences in the Star Wars universe, in the story at large. Therefore, you must care. Instead of actually doing the work of giving us characters to give a shit about, it almost feels like maybe this is a product of the directors changing hands. I don't know, but it feels like them panicking and being like, shit, well, if if our movie's kind of boring and no one cares about these characters, and even the most exciting action is bereft of dramatic tension, how do we ratchet that up? We'll scope it. We'll increase the scope. We'll say, look at how important and affecting this is. You care about this for these reasons. And that is kind of... I felt like you touched on that's kind of why Mandalorian season 2 maybe didn't resonate as emotionally well for me, is that in the first season it was just about Mando and his kind of journey and his discovery of that maybe his worldview could use some adjustment, and that maybe he'd grown up in a particular way. And then season 2 was like, now he's in the middle of the Mandalorian's trying to take back Mandalore, and he's also in the middle of like this Luke Jedi thing, and then also this Ahsoka Darth Vader thing, and then also this Ahsoka and General whoever thing, and like suddenly he just by plot accident he ends up in the middle of all of these gigantic events. And this has that tone, but instead of where Mando, it feels like natural for him to stumble into it because he's the only character in Star Wars that doesn't realize he's in Star Wars. Like there's something about this movie where that all feels forced. And it's probably the thing that we'll end up talking about the most is it just feels so disingenuous.
I think you're getting close to talking about or basically just what people when they say fan service and they mean it in a negative way, right? When they're like, oh, look, here's how he got his blaster. Okay, and here's this thing and here's that thing, and about this and so on and so on and so forth. And I was talking to somebody about Mandalorian versus like the sequels earlier this week, and I was saying how, because they described Mandalorian, especially season 2, as being nothing but fan service, and I was saying how, if you look especially at, if you compare the Mandalorian with the sequels, it feels to me like the sequels, and this movie as well, they're like, all right, here's the different things that we need to hit. How do we work that into the plot? Versus how Jon Favreau in an interview actually described how he got to the end of Mandalorian season 2 and who shows up there, and saying, I wrote the plot, and then who would show up there, and then ask the question who would show up there, and that's the answer.
And it's you're absolutely right.
And so in that respect, you can actually compare that directly with the end of Solo. Again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but you compare that with Maul's appearance, where that is like, it makes sense that that's who it would be if you know the broader story of like the Clone Wars and Rebels and everything. But if you are just your casual Star Wars moviegoer and like, wait a minute, the last time I saw him, he was cut in half, falling down a shaft. Yeah.
Yeah, and it also doesn't recontextualize anything in the story. Like we don't get that reveal and then go, oh my god, if only I'd been paying more attention, I could have seen that Kira was using all of Maul's tactics. Like, because we don't know anything about what, like, it
literally does nothing.
It does nothing. It's not like the best example I can think of is in the original Sherlock Holmes novels. Moriarty is not like a big player. Like, he's in one story, but the reason he's famous is he's in the story where Sherlock Holmes dies and stays dead for like a number of actual years. But the reason that story is really interesting and why Moriarty kind of stuck in everybody's head as like a really interesting villain is he's able to push Sherlock in a way that he's never been pushed before. Equally with when you kind of first meet the femme fatale of that story, it's Sherlock's sexism that ultimately means he's beaten by Irene Adler. He underestimates a woman because he's vulnerable to society's kind of prejudices in a way that he hadn't really considered before. But each of those stories ends with you suddenly realizing that Sherlock was beaten by this other person. In Irene Adler's case, she's already she's out of the picture already. She's escaped the country. And he goes to the safe where she's supposedly hidden this stuff, and he's like, damn, she beat me. And the way that you find out that she beat him recontextualizes every part of that story where you're like, oh, she was playing him the whole time. That's really cool. And you can make that connection and you can see how she did it because you suddenly understand that she's using his tactics against him. This story doesn't have that. This story doesn't have a moment where you're like, oh my God, Darth Maul was involved the whole time. Wow. You just go, huh, what? All right.
I know that man.
Yeah, you're like, I recognize that red man. Yeah. All right.
Well, the thing especially about his reveal that I think the first time I saw it and every time I've seen it since then, I kind of it has the opposite of probably the desired effect where he's standing there and it's what's his name? Is it Ray Park?
No, it's a new guy. Is it Ray Park? I thought it was a different dude.
Wasn't it? I thought it was Ray Park. Well, whoever is playing it. He's got the voice and the look and everything. I'm like, well, first of all, he looks kind of a lot older than the last time we saw him, but he's still very intimidating. Again, based on what I've seen from him in Clone Wars and Rebels, like I find that character is much more developed now than he was in Just a Phantom Menace. So to me, he's bringing all that with him and he's intimidating. But to your average audience goer, they might be still sitting there going like, wait, I know who that is. Do I? He looks familiar. Wasn't he dead? And then he ignites the lightsaber. And
tacky.
part of that is to remind you of who he is, right? If you're, casual Star Wars guy. But I see that, and it's supposed to be intimidating, and I see it, and I just laugh because why is he doing that?
cheesy.
It doesn't make any sense.
Why would you? Also, those are like, okay, so this is the thing about lightsabers. They're pretty dangerous tools. Like, it just also, we've seen characters use the Force while on hologram calls before to like strangle people and stuff. Like Darth Vader does it all the time when he's talking to people through the Star Wars cell phone type thing. I don't understand why he didn't just like do the Force on Kira or something. Like do something actually intimidating. Prove that he could hurt her from a distance. I don't know. Igniting a lightsaber, what's he gonna do? Cut through the hologram? Like what's the threat there? I don't understand it.
Yeah, I don't
It's
know.
so baffling. It's just like, look at how big my dick is, guys. Check this out. Look at what is. Anyway, okay. We listen. All right, we got off track immediately.
We started at the middle of the movie, and now we're
at the end. Okay, so
That's efficiency.
so
people.
we need to get a ship, right? This is our current quest. Is we need a ship for this run that's going to be fast enough to do the Kessel Run. And Kira's like, listen, I know a guy, right? And we all think, ooh, she knows a guy, and she's like, yeah, it's the fastest bloody ship you've ever bloody heard of, mate. It's the Millennium Bloody Falcon. And we're like, yes, it is, boys. And so we head to a no good bar full of miscreants.
Hold up. Pause and rewind like 30 seconds there.
Yes.
We had talked briefly about why he forced Kira to go in the first place, and we never really had a solid answer to that.
No.
Aside from she just had to go to make the story progress.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I thought about two things when I did my rewatch. Number one, Dryden doesn't refer to him as his girlfriend, his personal assistant, nothing. He refers to her as his lieutenant.
Lieutenant, yeah.
Which is a very interesting definition because that both carries military, some kind of military term with it, and it also conveys that she has some level of experience. Well, then that's when he's like introducing her, right? So then fast forward to the part where he's telling her to go with them. And if you look at the scene, and it's like when you watch it again, look at the way that she is framed in the shot when he is saying, if you fail me again, we'll all be out of options. And she is the one in the foreground that the camera is focusing on. So the way that he's threatening her is almost like saying, I was looking for an excuse to test you again, and this is it, because whatever she did for him last time apparently didn't work. And so that's the way that I interpreted it with this second viewing, was that he was just using Han as an excuse to test Kira. I don't know if any of that is true, but
Interesting.
Well, the fact that she betrays him at the end maybe speaks to like why she messed up the first time. Maybe she was already trying to put that plan in motion.
Yeah. Well, because if she's working with
yeah.
Maul behind his back the whole time, maybe she's trying to undercut this son of a
Yeah.
bitch. Maybe she's the one that wants to have the cool glowy dagger thing. You know?
It suits her better.
It does. It's a pretty cool weapon as well.
It is.
I'd take a laser knife any day. That is a good point, Darth. Trying to unpack that motivation, but then it's like he's really mad that the coaxium is. I don't know. There's a lot of layers to this. That does make more sense though. Does anybody have any other ideas, any other pitches for why that happens?
I think it's possible, and I think it was Danielle who might have mentioned this last time. I think it's possible. I like that answer better that Darth had, but it's possible it could be they were going for something as simple as you speak up, or you vouch for somebody, and you're on the line too.
That does sound like very like crime gang type energy. That sounds like something out of Peaky Blinders.
But even I mean, I can kind of see that, but even that is not. They don't really commit to that as an idea, so you could go either way on that.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the larger issue with a lot of the ideas here is that none of them are completely like they never lean into anything enough that they risk consequence. We touched on it last time with Darth brought up,
or that they're actually saying something.
Yeah. It's like you if you lent into any of these, you risk accidentally upsetting some of your audience if they disagree with it, and they maybe don't like our protagonists, and we can't have that because, as Kennedy says over and over again, our job here is to protect these characters, not tell good stories, and that is the hill she will die on, and that is what she will be famous for, in my opinion. is protecting these characters, not telling good stories. Because to tell a good story, you have to put your characters in moral and mortal jeopardy properly, and that can people might not like the decisions they make, and that's what makes good stories is that you're able to interpret and decide for yourself. But there has to be no room for that. Okay, we don't want to lean too far into anything in case we accidentally say something someone doesn't like. Because The Last Jedi was received very poorly, so they're in panic mode at this point. So I kind of get it from a capitalist perspective, but yeah, it's that they just never. There's never any commitment to any of these concepts.
Is that a real quote?
What?
We have to protect these characters?
Yeah, let me see if I can find it. The exact quote is she's talking about the way that she decides how to frame projects and who to put on them. And she's like, our number one priority is protecting these characters above all else.
The main thing is to protect these characters, make sure that they still continue to live in the way that you created them, and that the universe of Star Wars continues to grow.
I just said that I would back her up, and I would be there if and especially help him with the script and making sure the script sort of, there's a lot of blank spots in the story treatment that hopefully we can fill in. And
I think the incredible thing about George is, this is not like a series of books like Harry Potter where you've already got a template of what the stories might be. These are original stories and original ideas that come out of a world that essentially is in George's head. So the beauty of the collaboration that can continue is, as we work our way through these scripts, if we're sitting and saying, I wonder if this character can do that, or does this make sense within the rules of Star Wars? That really, he's the keeper of the flame when it comes to that.
It's the same thing with the first three films. That's all my job is to be the keeper of the flame. Well, it's based on human behavior, human psychology.
The exact quote is protecting these characters.
Yeah, I know I've heard that before as well. And I've also heard her say that they had no clue where to go with the storyline because there was no existing material, which I wish I had been the audience when she had said that. I just would have burst out laughing and I had been escorted out.
Yeah.
Well, the context of that is important because she was referring to, I believe, The Rise of Skywalker.
She was, but it's
even
still
that
nonsense,
was
because someone threw a tarpaulin over the hundreds of novels and comic books and.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is the entire EU and everything, but I think she was saying there's no source material for where they're going after The Last Jedi, which on the one hand is true, but on the other is what's the one where Palpatine comes back in the EU?
Oh God, there's
because that's there. It's out there.
Dark something.
Is it Dark Disciple?
No, Dark Disciple's Dark Disciple's the one with the
No, it's Dark.
Yeah.
I don't remember what. Somebody will know what it is.
Someone let us know in the comments.
You know what we're talking about.
You know what we're fucking talking about. But yeah, it's like even absent like all of that EU stuff, you could just like write a good movie though. Like this is the thing
that's your job. Like that's the job, right? You come up with an idea.
Well, yeah, you'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I can't just like if I turn around tomorrow and I was like, yeah, I'm really struggling with book 4 because there's no existing material. Yeah, duh. That's what you're doing.
Right.
You're creating stories. It's just what a bad
That's
faith
perplexing.
argument.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we need a ship, right? So we head to this den of thieves, this scum, this hive of villainy, and we meet Lando Calrissian, played by Donald Glover, which is chef's kiss. What an inspired casting choice!
Oh, so good.
Oh, he's delightful. I would watch him do anything, but this is just just beautiful. What a great piece of cinema. The capes, the facial hair, everything. Oh, it's delightful.
Yes. The mustache.
The mustache is so
great.
powerful. And so the setup here is Kira's like, look, I know a guy, right? And what we need to do is Han's like, he's going to challenge Lando to a game of Sabbac, with the wager being Lando's ship. Now, he needs to win this, right? They don't have any money. All they've got left is this one thing of coaxium. They need to win this. But Lando cheats to win, and then joins them anyway.
Yeah.
I don't really...
Han's like, I can't pay you, and he just lets that go.
Yeah, he's like, well, but I'll come on your suicide run, I guess.
Well, no, Beckett offers to pay him, though. Beckett says, we'll give you 25% if you come in and Lando says no 50%, then they negotiate it down to whatever 25. Although that does bring up a point that I had been wanting to talk about was Dryden Voss should be getting like 100% of the cut because he's the boss.
That's true.
And they're giving away all of these sub percentages to other people. Like they're saying Han gets a cut, Chewie gets a cut. Now they're giving Lando 25%. Where is that coming from?
Also, aren't they doing this to recover the coaxium they lost the first time? Like, aren't they already in debt?
I always took that to mean so they're getting X amount of credits for doing this job, and that is the pool that they're dividing up. Is what I took it to mean.
But surely they're doing this for free because they fucked up the first one. I didn't occur to me that Dryden would still be paying them. I thought this was them working off their debt so he doesn't murder them. I don't know.
Well, that's the question of did he pay? I mean, he wouldn't. This doesn't seem like the guy that would pay in advance, right?
That's true.
So they made a deal where I'll pay you this and you bring me that, but if you fail, then I'll kill you. But that's it's never mind. I'm not going to pay you for not doing the job. I'm going to kill you too. So there's
Oh, wow.
I have a whole bunch of stuff to say about this scene, but I know from last time that Danielle had really wanted to talk about Lando and L3.
I do,
do
but
now,
I'll save that for later in the movie.
Hold on, one more thing about the money, just because it just occurred to me that we talked about how cruel Beckett was, and he didn't care about giving away that extra 25% because that was his dead wife's share that she doesn't need anymore.
This dude is icy, man. This dude is icy.
Damn, cold and rational.
Jesus Christ. This dude.
I forgot about that.
This dude is winning the foot race for rationalization. That's.
Well, he's Lan's no he's not Lan, Han. He's Han's Obi-Wan character for this movie. He's who Han needs to become not become, because he's still not that, but he needs to be more like him or to learn from him so that he can become the Han from A New Hope.
Well, yeah, because he's the mentor in this hero's journey here, and which I kind of like, because the way that resolves itself is that Han actually does outsmart him, even though Han is still beat by Kira. Like, there's a lot of kind of moving pieces on the board at the end, which we'll talk about. But yeah, you're right. This is, in order to contend with the new world, he needs to take on a lot of the skills that the mentor is kind of presenting to him. And he manages to do it pretty effectively. Does anyone else have anything on the Lando introduction slash?
Yes. So I love how, this film had a chance to extrapolate Lando and Han's relationship, something that you see glimpses of in episode 5 and 6, and I never really thought anything of it, but when I watched this, it occurred to me how great their relationship is, because they're kind of the same person. They're both arrogant and suave and talkative, and it's the best dynamic of the movie, I think.
It's great because they constantly do things, and the other one's like, God damn it, now I have to go save you, and they keep doing it to each other. It's so good.
And just the characterization of Lando, he has a full drawer of capes.
I know.
His weird kind of relationship with his robot, all that is great. I also love how, because when they're playing that game of Sabbac, because from the original trilogy that he won the Millennium Falcon from him, and so it's a great little subversion here when he loses. So you don't expect it. Yeah.
Little cheeky little subversion. I like that. Their dynamic is just phenomenal. The charisma of these two actors together is, I would watch a mini series of them just doing space shit.
Oh yeah.
Just little fun kind of space adventures. Something that's interesting here is that, and it's not really something that Star Wars gets into too much ever really, is kind of back to what we were talking about before with coaxium and the economy and money and stuff. We talked about it last episode around Voss's yacht and his wealth, and the first time we've really seen wealth outside of the Empire. Lando was the first time we've really seen wealth and cleanliness on the kind of, not the criminal end, because Voss is kind of a criminal, but in a non-systematized space. So Voss is part of this collective of the Crimson Dawn or whatever they're called, and a lot of his wealth and opulence is because he's part of that structure. Lando is an independent agent who has seemingly wealth and luxury and freedom, in a way that we haven't really seen before. And I think that's what makes him an attractive prospect for Han to be friends with, is he kind of represents Beckett's endgame, which is like you become the suave, swashbuckling space cowboy, and you get your independent wealth, and you get your own ship. He's kind of everything that... Lando is everything that Han wants to be, and he's everything that Beckett is pretending to be. And I think that's kind of interesting to me. That nice little kind of foils for each other there. Yeah, I love it.
So the stuff that I had, I wrote several pages of notes on
Good.
this. But
Let's get into it.
Or not just on this scene, but like I think I have a full page on this scene where I was trying to figure out what is the purpose of this scene. Because you start off with the problem of we need a fast ship. So the solution is Lando has a fast ship, we need to hire him. But we have the problem of he's retired. And then, so then you have we go into the solution of, all right, we'll beat him in a card game. And the first thing I have here is, one of my big things is the establishing of skills or tools before we know that we need these tools or skills. So it's like, oh, well, we can beat him in a card game. I'm a great gambler. Where does that come from? That's just out of nowhere. Yeah. But I was thinking about this. I'm like, on the one hand, it's just like, okay, Han is a great gambler, but that totally does fit with his personality because it is a game of bluffing. But the other part of the problem with this scene is, how does Sabbac work?
Yeah. What?
I wondered if we were going to get into this.
Where's the tension?
Because I was thinking that tension is right. Like I was thinking of like the Hitchcock thing of shock versus suspense, where we know something that the characters don't, and like I think we don't know that Lando cheated until after the game is over.
No, we know he's cheating during. We see him cheat and Han doesn't.
Because I know we see the arm thing, but I don't remember if
I'm
that's
pretty sure we
before or after
only
he
see
wins.
that the mechanism slide up his sleeve right after he wins the game with Han. So
Okay,
Han looks
so-
defeated, and then we see the close-up of his sleeve.
Okay, so it's dramatic tension.
So,
then, which is that we know the same thing.
Yeah, and I was watching this scene today, and I had a thought, and I went and you guys have seen Casino Royale, James Bond?
Yeah, so good.
Yeah,
Patrick,
so they have
Pat just
that
shook
game.
his head. What are you doing, Pat?
I've seen no James Bond
Oh,
films.
okay. I'm gonna.
I mean, to be fair,
What?
I've seen it, but I don't know. Like, I only saw it like at a hotel one
Casino
time. Where I
Royale
was like
is
falling
the
asleep.
best of Daniel Craig's Bond movies.
Yeah, Mitchie's been getting up me to watch
Yes,
it.
I 100%
Okay, we're gonna do it for your
concur with that.
podcast. I'm pressuring you into this.
Fuck yeah.
It's on microphone.
Yeah,
You can't take it.
so anyway, during that they have so I don't remember. I didn't have enough time to go back and like look to see how much they explain Texas Hold'em or whatever, but the movement they do with the cards and everything else, if you don't know how to play poker, they make it very clear to you and the audience what's happening, who's got the advantage, what the decision is. And then they cut to the girl and I forget the guy's name, but there's two other people watching this game take place, and he's telling her, oh, this guy needs to bluff, this is what's happening here. And so you have that, it's communicating information to the audience on what we should be worried about. This is good, this is bad, this is, so on and so forth. And I think in the scene that I was looking at, the guy who's communicating to the audience goes, oh, the bad guy, he just that's his tell, James is going to win this, and so that's what we're thinking. And no, subvert the expectations, the bad guy wins. But so I was thinking about that, and then go back to this scene, there is none of that. So this whole, and then you finish the card game, Han loses the ship that he does not have, and Lando doesn't seem to care about that. And then they hire him anyway. So I was like, what was the point of all that? And it's basically just the two of them talking and the introduction of Lando's character. But I think you could cut that whole part, because really the only thing that you really need out of all that is establishing that Lando has the arm thing, because that's how Han beats him at the end.
Yeah, that would have been actually really good, I think, if maybe Han was like maybe they walked in, he catches the game and he notices that or something. Like, instead of having us play the game and go through this whole scene, just have Han watching
and maybe
then
commenting,
just be quick about it.
commentating.
Well,
to,
I don't know
to
if
characters.
anyone. I don't know if you picked up on it, but Han knew he was cheating without ever seeing the device, because Han was.
Yes.
We'll say counting cards, even though it's really hard to do that when it comes to poker. And
Counting
I'm assuming
shapes.
Sabbac is.
I don't know.
Yeah.
They have shapes and colors. It's very confusing.
Yeah, but he said there was no way he had that little green Psylocke because all of them had been played.
Yes.
So he had an extra card in the deck that was not supposed to be there. So Han knew that there was cheating going on. And the interesting thing, before I forget to say it, like at the very end when Han eventually does win, and he wins completely legit just because he steals that card. Well, 30 years later, Lando accuses him of cheating to win the Falcon. But he cheated by making Lando not able to cheat. That was his quote-unquote cheating.
See,
Yeah,
that's there's layers to
And
that.
that, in that, yeah, and in that scene, that is the first time that he sees the arm thing. So, like what Darth said, he knows he's cheating, or he knew he cheated, but he doesn't see the arm thing
Right.
until Chewie's. So he's like, Chewie, rip his arms off, and Lando raises his hand, and then Han sees the thing sticking out.
Interesting. So it's interesting you bring that up, Rye, like that as a comparison point, because I just finished watching The Queen's Gambit. I don't know if you guys have seen that Netflix show, but that's all about chess and like really high level chess play. And I know the basics of chess, but they do this thing in that very similarly to Casino Royale, where when they're playing these very high level chess games that are just like way too complicated to explain in a TV show, they have like commentary, like radio commentators, or they'll have someone they'll have another chess expert standing by commentating to somebody else, explaining to you who's kind of got the upper hand and who's winning and like what they need to do to overcome. But crucially, the acting is so good of the characters playing chess that even absent that commentary, you can tell when someone's in a tight spot, right? They do a really good job of communicating purely with facial expressions. The actors in this are so good that you understand just from looking at them and how they move the pieces and the tension on their faces and their posture and the way and how long they take to play their pieces. You can tell whether or not they're in a sticky situation. And it's really subtle and it's really smart, and it makes for very, very good dramatic TV. And I think there's a missed opportunity here, either to like you say in Casino Royale, give us that commentary, or I was trying to think of even another solution where you could have, if you wanted Sabbac to be a big part of this, there's a lot of opportunities to have people playing Sabbac in this world. Like maybe it's a favorite game of smugglers or something, and we could at least get au fait enough with it that we could understand what's happening. But that would be so much conceptual legwork that I almost think it's not worth it.
That would be interesting if they had introduced that at some point, like in the beginning of the movie, like in Han's home, like him playing that with somebody. I'm not saying that would work necessarily, but it would have at least planted the seed that, okay, he's played this before, he's good at it.
I mean, he could even be playing it during the fireside chat or something. Like, there's a lot of opportunities here to see that as a skill, like Rye was saying.
When you go into the cinema, they should have been handing out flyers explaining the game.
Give me the how to. Yeah. I want the pamphlet.
No. I want to go back and clarify that, like because this is a big thing of that I see on the one side of critics of especially the sequels. You have this idea that everything needs to be explained, and then on the other side, you have the people are like, well, then it would just be like, an hour and a half long lore session or whatever. And I think certain things need to be explained. Certain things we need to get contextual clues. The reason why I think this scene would work a lot better if Sabbac were explained to us, or at least we knew where the advantage was, would be that this scene feels very passive to me, because we're watching two guys talk, and then somebody wins and somebody loses, and we don't know we don't really have an anticipation of what's going to happen there. So it feels very passive to me in the middle of the movie, where we have very long sections. We go from the yacht to stealing the Falcon to all the conversations on the Falcon. There's a lot of very inactive moments in this middle of the movie.
And one reason that game feels so passive, I just realized, is because the ending of that first game was Lando betting his ship against Han's ship, Han's imaginary ship.
His pretend ship.
So we've had whatever 6 minutes of gameplay, of them pushing the gold coins back and forth across the table, all of that meant absolutely nothing because it all came down to betting one ship against the other ship. So no one actually had an advantage when it comes to all of the money that was on the table. So like Rai said, the entire thing had no point because from the very first hand, Han could have sat down and said, okay, I'm playing for your ship, and all of the money on the table is completely irrelevant.
That is such an interesting contrast then with what we were discussing with Casino Royale, where in that story, Bond has a certain amount of money that the British Secret Service have given him, and he's constantly pushing the envelope of how much of that he can bet and try and get away with. Where they're like, no, we're only giving you this much, and he's constantly like, no, I'm pushing this thing. I'm going to try and get more to make this thing happen. And because the money is a point of tension there, where he then at some point has to kind of go outside the rules to get more cash to make this thing work. Whereas here, the money is, you're right, it's immaterial. Ultimately, it's just one hand that is actually where the tension exists, which is that final play between the two. That is so interesting as an escalating stakes issue. Then him betting more coin, or him betting the coaxium, or whatever it is, like there's no rising tension. It's just the same thing until the end, and then there's a spike, and then that's it. Like there's no arc to this scene. It's just flat, and then bang, and then we're out of it.
Yeah, and all of that again in the middle of this very long section of the movie where we do not have that, where we don't have a lot of tension.
Yeah,
and this is where I think fan service is sometimes not good, because I don't think fan service in and of itself is bad, but this felt like a bad example of it, because it's basically there just to sort of say, oh, you think he's going to win the Millennium Falcon? Haha, just kidding. So
I can imagine Ron Howard saying that.
Well, it provides a lot of
you know,
characterization.
One interesting thing that could have let them inject more tension into it was looking at how Sabbac was portrayed in the books and stuff. I recall it was presented as a much bigger game of luck because the cards were digital and would actually randomly change a couple times throughout the game. So I think it was called like a Wild Sabbac moment or something like that, where the cards change and now you really don't know what your opponent has.
Cool.
That could have given a completely different, because like maybe Han at that point, he doesn't know that the little green Psylop hasn't been played because all the cards changed. So maybe it's back in the cards that were discarded, they're now back in play. So it could have created a lot more tension if they had gone with that route, but granted that might have been way more confusing because this is the first time it's ever been put on film. So that may have been a more confusing way to go with it.
It's definitely a more interesting pitch, and it presents more interesting problems to have to solve narratively and exposition wise, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think the obvious solve here is kind of rearrange the scene a little bit and have Kira maybe explain to Chewbacca what's going on, because he's a fucking giant dog. He doesn't know what the fuck this card game is. It's a really easy, like, she's pretty smart.
Oh, be careful. You do not refer to Chewbacca as a
Sorry.
pet.
He's a big dog
not
man.
a giant dog.
Is that better? He's a dog man.
I mean, ironically, it would have gone the other way because he's, 140 years old, so he actually would have been explaining it to her, probably.
That wouldn't have helped us as the audience, though.
It would not.
The whole time. Kira's like, wow, that sounds intense. Actually, that's a very funny version
he's
of that
190
scene.
years old,
I like
so
that.
he might know it. But he likes the chess thing that he plays on the Falcon.
The holographic
so
chess.
He might not know how to play Sabbac. So, but she could explain it to him, or she could explain it to Beckett, or Beckett could explain it to her. There's lots of different ways. There's lots of people available who aren't doing anything.
Right.
Yeah.
To lay out some exposition.
I also maybe would have liked to see a bit more like physical danger here. We're in like a tavern in the middle of fucking nowhere. There's a lot of guns and stuff around. Someone's clearly cheating. Like, it would have been cool to see the tension in the room ratchet up slowly as the game goes on, where, you could maybe see people getting a little restless, and like maybe, Kira could be like, oh, what the fuck's going on? And Beckett could explain like, oh, those people are clearly with this guy who's playing and they hate these people. And, Lando's the interloper here and he's ruffling some feathers, and we could maybe see some hands on some belts and stuff near some guns. Like, give us that like real like Western, like, this is a dangerous place to be trying to achieve this goal of getting the ship. And maybe that could help us with the rising tension. Like it's the little details that seem to constantly fail this movie when it comes to these structural decisions. We have to take a quick ad break, and then we're going to talk about Kessel and the journey to Kessel. With there's a few little kind of a few little sort of small independent. They're almost like little like short character moments that we get on the Falcon. So we'll take a quick break and then talk about those. So we're gonna cut away, enjoy these products or services, whatever they may be, and we'll be right back with you. Hey guys, this third episode of Too Much Cowboy is once again sponsored by the Maynard Trigg novel series. They are my low sci-fi fantasy coming of age stories, all about the protagonist Maynard Trigg. The dust jacket describes it like this: a powerful debut novel for people who grew up with fantastic stories and are looking for a new world to explore. Maynard Trigg lives a carefree life in the muddied slums of Carthage Skyport, making mischief at the expense of his loving father, his friends, and teachers. But when a pirate appears, claiming to have been sent to protect Maynard from a murderous creature, he is thrust into a life of magic, theft, and deceit. A life he promised himself he would never pursue. This is Maynard Trigg. If you're not convinced by that, go check out the Goodreads page. There are tons of reviews from people that loved reading it. It's one of my favorite things we've ever done. There are currently 2 books out and a third on the way in about 6 or 9 months' time. MaynardTrigg.com and use code Cowboy10 at checkout. That is code Cowboy10 at checkout for 10% off your first paperback order. Once again, that is MaynardTrigg.com and coupon code Cowboy10 at checkout for 10% off your first paperback order. All right, welcome back from that brief ad break. So now we're going to talk about traveling from where this back end port. We've convinced Lando to give us a ride and to give us some assistance on this quest as a kind of a splitting some of our reward here. And we get kind of these little character moments on the Falcon. We get Chewie playing chess. We get Han and Kira fooling around in the cape closet, which I love that there's a cape closet. And he's like, "Stop making out on my capes." It's very, very fun. My all-time favorite moment of this whole thing is Lando recording his exploits on like a little holotape. Yes. Is my favorite thing of all time.
The Calrissian Chronicles, Chapter 5, continued. Personally, I wasn't all that impressed with the Cheru. No sense of humor or style. Nonetheless, there L3 and I were, deep in their sacred temple. And that's when we saw it. Always something.
Like their little adventures or whatever.
It's very
God,
like
good.
William Shatner-esque.
It's very very like Captain's Log.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even his inflection is like Stardate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Captain's Log.
Captain's Log. Yeah, it does have that vibe. I really like this little sequence. It's maybe misplaced pacing wise, but it does a lot for us to understand where Han and Kira are at. Yeah, what do y'all think of this little journey, and I guess the introduction here of L337, the kind of co-pilot slash Lando's companion. Danielle, do you just want to tell us about L3?
Okay. Well, first of all, we meet her back where they were playing. What's the game called again? I apologize.
Sabbac.
Okay. Because she is at this fighting arena, it looks like, where droids are fighting, or forced to fight.
Mm-hmm.
And she's basically screaming for them to be liberated and realize that they're independent and they can make choices of their own free will.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a pretty strong introduction considering, because, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if we've ever seen a droid quite recognize their quote-unquote humanity or independence. Outwardly like this?
This is the first time. C-3PO sometimes, but this is really the first time it's not played for a laugh.
And he always admits that he's like a droid and doesn't own anything and all that kind of stuff. Like it's somewhere where he's written intelligently enough to almost have humanity about him, but he knows that he doesn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right that she's like completely unique so far in what we've seen. Aside from Rogue One, whatever that robot's name was.
The one played by Alec.
I mean, R2 is R2. You know the thing about him is he marches to his own beat or
That's
whatever.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't give a shit.
But no, this one is far and away the most outspoken of all the droids. I imagine if R2 could speak basic, he would probably sound quite a bit like this. Although I don't think I think this character takes it further than any droid that we've seen by far.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I guess she also likes Lando.
Lando likes her.
This is a tricky one, guys. This is a tricky one to talk about. Yeah. Yeah. So I want to just do a quick bit of table setting, and then Danielle, take us away and sort of tell us how this works for you. So we were talking before about the fact that this is like a Western, and the object of desire is fuel, and there is a lot of like particularly with Kessel as a concept, there is the idea of like, it leans into the Western stuff even more. There's a mine where they're getting this resource, and the people in the mine are the ones who are under the toe of the oppressive ruling class. And the ones who are under the toe of the oppressive ruling class happen to also be droids, which seems to suggest in this kind of in the way that they've adapted the West here, and taken these themes, the tacit implication, whether or not they're doing it consciously or whether it's just a product of the themes they've chosen and the topics they've chosen to explore, the tacit implication here is that droids are a stand-in for the oppressed class, which in the West was typically the native population, your indigenous populations, your indigenous peoples. And so the tacit implication here is that droids are representative of that kind of class of people on Kessel, and perhaps in the Star Wars universe writ large, in L3's kind of view. And that L3, this droid, has an attraction to Lando, and Lando has an attraction to this droid, and that he is our only character of color outside of Beckett's wife in this story. There's a lot going on here textually, and there's less going on subtextually than I think there should be. That's my table setting. That's why it's hard to talk about. How does this... What do you think of all of this, Danielle? Where's your head at?
Well, the whole romance stuff, at least as far as I was concerned, I thought that was more just played as a joke. Correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't think that Lando actually had feelings for her. I thought it was more of a platonic thing. Like, he almost, like, because she suggests it at one point, and he's kind of, like, or he's not there for that, I guess, but, like, she'll make comments, and he's just kind of like, no. But then, like, you realize, at her unfortunate demise that he really does love her, but it didn't feel like anything beyond platonic. I don't know, it just felt like a friendship thing. I don't know how everybody else read that, but it just felt like a sort of gag for me.
I believe what they were going for was that Lando literally did have a kink for robots, because when he's being served by the robot droid while they're playing Sabbac, he says something like, "Thank you, sweetheart," or something like that. So just the fact that he assigned a female gender, assumedly, to that robot, but then the same thing a second time with L3, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, there's a moment when Kira asks her, like, how would that work? And then L3 goes, "Oh, it works." Like, as if they've done it or something.
It's so weird.
It gave me major vibes from Captain Jack from Doctor Who. Like, he was attracted to any species whatsoever. It didn't matter.
If it breathes and it fucks, he's in.
He's swings
ready.
every direction.
Yeah, he doesn't give it. He doesn't discriminate, that man. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Captain Jack is a really good touchstone for this kind of sexuality, where it's almost like... I think Doctor Who gets away with it more because Captain Jack has a much broader range of emotional expression throughout both his time on Doctor Who and Torchwood, and even his reintroduction into the series under Chris Chibnall. Even though Chris Chibnall's a hack and should not be allowed to write that TV program, at least he handles that character relatively well because it is his character. I think Captain Jack has lots more degrees of emotionality, whereas L3 is either screaming about liberation or is kind of horny for Lando. Those are the two modes of being if you're the L3 droid. I think Rogue One's an interesting touch point because that loudmouth droid in that, who's played by that's Alan Tudyk, right?
Yeah.
That droid has a lot of character and personality and like it's dynamic and has like ranges of emotion. Whereas I feel like L3 sometimes, at least the on-screen appearance, we don't seem to get a lot of other interests at play here. I don't know. It feels reductionist that the lower class or the subjugated class robot, as a standard for the indigenous people, only cares about not being under the heel of the oppressive class and also wants to fuck the pilot. Like, why are those the two modes of being for this character?
That's kind of though like Disney's direction with a lot of their properties today. A lot of people say this about the Disney remakes, where they'll have this moment of quote unquote wokeness, where they'll basically be trying to do the woke thing and it's not. And so it kind of feels like L3 is there to be like, oh, she's all about liberation and rebellion, and that's what a lot of people can resonate with, especially today. But like it just kind of falls flat, and she doesn't really have a character.
Well, Disney's way behind on their like diversity quota, so they're trying to catch up. They're trying to.
Yeah.
Well, that's true.
But then to have the one of the only people of color in the film to like basically find her pleas for revolution exasperating is weirdly tone deaf. Where
it's they don't know that.
No,
I
know. Yeah. I know that. I know that they don't know that. But yeah, it's a lot. I think there's a lot of ways to read this. I think there's a portion of the community who read this as maybe like an asexual kind of romantic relationship in some ways, or even like Danielle said, like kind of a platonic, but with the potential for something more there. I think a lot of people found in this character something they could identify with that they hadn't maybe seen in Star Wars before. Even though L3 is a droid, but there is at least a portion of the community that went, I feel better represented in some ways by having this character here. I just think that maybe we shouldn't necessarily be giving Disney points for doing the absolute bare minimum, and still somehow doing it in a very tone deaf way that has a lot of really nasty kind of implications if you think about it for too long.
And not to get away from this too much, but I forgot to mention too that she apparently has a very good navigation system. So that obviously ties in with the Falcon. But I guess we'll get there.
And actually, to still talk about her personality, it's a point to talk about whether whether Lando really cared about her at all, because he actually came out and said that he would have wiped her memory and reformatted her, except that she had the best navigational system out of anyone ever. So did he quote unquote love her if he was willing to get rid of her personality with a snap of his fingers?
But that's a classic Han Solo move, to lie about caring about someone in order to not get hurt, right? That's like, if you don't express vulnerability, then you can't be hurt, right? If you keep everybody at arm's length.
I didn't really take that line, or I didn't think that line was meant to be read literally or heard literally. That, well, I would, but he's such a good cook or something like that, or that kind of stuff. You see that all
I thought he was just being clever.
But I was thinking about that when I was, because we only hear his or her side of it. The romantic relationship or whatever is only implied by her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I believe so.
The death scene really shows it from his point of view, though. I mean,
right? But to what Danielle said about, like, is that is that more than just a platonic relationship? Like the in Rogue One, who is that? It's K2SO.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Cassian and Jin, and of course us in the audience, we feel we are emotionally affected by his death. Spoiler alert. But So, I mean, I'm trying to think of how to... But there's no romantic relationship there. He's just part of the team, and they've grown attached to him.
Yeah, but the reactions of the main characters who see him die, at least if I recall right, I don't... Maybe Jin doesn't actually see him die because she's climbing around out in the thing at that particular time. So I get...
Well, it's not something they... At that point of the movie, I don't think it's something they really have much time to dwell on.
Yeah. So I guess there is no good comparison.
Yeah, which makes it even more interesting as an inclusion. I'm sure we'll talk about L3 more when we get to the end of this sequence. But essentially, so the plan on Kessel is they're gonna... This is the proper high spit of the movie. So they're going to break in and
well, if I may.
No, you
Sorry.
go.
So I said before how this middle part of the movie is very kind of slow, and how maybe I would cut out that poker scene or whatever, but pretty much I think just about every scene that happens on the Falcon, I think there is some value. It's a lot of exposition, but there is some value there, and the big lesson of the movie is in that. Or for Han at least, or for his character, is there when Beckett's playing with Chewbacca. And what does he say? So anticipate your opponent. There's a lesson to be learned here. People are predictable. And what is it? And then he's so there's that, and then he talks to Han separately later, and Han's like, well, that's or what is he? Beckett says, I trust no one. That's the... And Han says that's a lonely way to live, and he says that's the only way to live. So there's a lot of mentor conversations happening here.
Yes.
And planting seeds for later events in the movie.
Absolutely.
Which is cool. That's smart.
Yeah, this is...
And I like that.
And the film does this a few times here where it sets up things for later that we need to know, that is important, and it slips by, and you don't notice it happening. It's very subtle, and it sticks in your head, and then when it pays off later, it doesn't clock as weird. Yeah, it's very competently made sequence. That does a lot for this story.
Well, that's part of what I like to see in sort of like a character's arc, where like you can see the points where here's the lesson, and here's where the lesson's reinforced, and the different things to how do we get the character from A to B. Like, there are movies in Star Wars where characters go from A to B, and I'm like, I'm not really sure how they got there. They did, but I'm not sure where are the points along that journey to mark, all right, this is the transition, this is the lesson being learned, this is the lesson not being learned, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and that's a large part of the structural stuff going on here, where we've talked about Joseph Campbell a few times and the way that this story kind of uses your classic hero's journey, and this is a great point in the middle of the story where we're in the middle of working out our allies and our enemies in anticipation for the final conflict, and this does a really good job of doing a lot of red herring work with both Beckett and Kira, where they both get their own little character moment with Han, where they get to convey to him their worldview, and he ultimately has to decide which of those he is going to adopt and honor in the end. And that is going to then determine his allegiance when the guns come out at the end and everything comes down to the wire. And it does a good job of that. I think the Kira scene's interesting because, conversely with Beckett, where Beckett is trying to like not set up Han to kind of beat him, but Beckett is like mentoring him in a way that benefits Beckett. Whereas I think Kira, at least in her little moment, I don't read that as her manipulating him. I read that as like a very authentic kind of interaction that they have.
Well, the interesting thing to me that I noticed was that both Beckett and Kira have very, very similar like worldviews, and this kind of felt like it was a theme of the movie that just wasn't really overt, but that they didn't care about winning, they didn't care about finding happiness, all they cared about was surviving. And Kira says that outright at some point, something like, Han says we're going to win this, and she says that's not what this is about, we're just trying to get by, we're just trying to survive. And the implication being that their lives have been so tough and they've been so broken so many times that they don't care about working towards a future. They're just trying to get through another day, get through another ship full of fuel and food for another day. And when you look at it, it makes total sense that's why Beckett wasn't broken by Val dying, because he had been broken a long time ago, and he didn't care about he didn't really deep down expect to ever have a happy future. So losing her really didn't affect him all that much. Just like Kira leaving Han at the end didn't seem to affect her all that much, because she had also been broken a long time ago and wasn't really expecting that happy future with Han that he was hoping for.
I disagree a little bit with the Kira part, but I think we'll probably get to that. Maybe not tonight.
Yeah, at this rate, probably not, but that's okay. So the plan on Kessel is very convoluted, but also very simple. So essentially, the Kira is going to pretend to be an Imperial lieutenant type person. They're going to bust in. They're going to locate the coaxium, and then they're going to boost it. It's a pretty simple kind of heist little setup. I think that one of my favorite parts of this movie is the shootout as they're escaping. Visually, it's one of my favorite parts of the film. It's just like, it's so well done. Does anybody have any thoughts on the kind of heist itself? It's basically pretty straightforward. Everything's going fine until L3 decides she's going to do a robot revolution.
As you do.
Again, like, yeah, we're not the best people to talk about this, but there is something at play here that I would love to maybe someone who you should seek out some more informed opinions on this sort of thing is Austin Walker. He writes for Vice Games. He's talked a lot about, big Star Wars fan. He's talked a lot about this stuff where the conflation of like droids and an indigenous population, particularly in a Western setting. There's a lot of icky stuff going on here. But as a plot setup, she starts this revolution, which then the whole mine basically erupts into this huge gunfight. And they have to kind of get the coaxium out in the midst of this kind of all-out sort of revolution. What do you guys think of the sequence as we go from like breaking into to suddenly everything hits the fan and we have to escape?
Well, the interesting thing of what you were just talking about with the indigenous people was that same thing is repeated later on with what's the planet that they go to, Severine? Where they're refining the coaxium, and all of the people that live there look at least a little bit remotely, you could say, like Native Americans. We have the same type of theme of the Western and the abused, beat down Native people who are trying to have their own rebellion and get the money to start that rebellion. So we've got the two different revolutions, the robot revolution and then the actual rebellion of the, not just the Savarinians, but other a whole bunch of different worlds that were represented there.
Well, and the rebellion, right? Crucially, like the Star Wars rebellion is started there.
Tying it into that big Star Wars story.
Yeah, exactly right. That is interesting. There is a lot of doubling in this story that's done relatively well. I don't want to talk about that side too much, just because I don't feel like we're best placed to do that. But yeah, I guess from a structural perspective, this thing plays out in a kind of interesting way. So Han's the one getting the coaxium, right? He's in the belly of the beast trying to extract it, and as he's escaping, he's helped out by I can't remember. Is it Chewbacca or is it just another Wookiee?
Yeah, it's some other Wookiee.
Just some other Wookiee.
Yeah.
But why?
Yeah, because doesn't Chewbacca go off or something? No. I don't know if I'm mixing up scenes.
That's right.
Well, no,
before they get to the coaxium, Chewie sees a group of Wookiees. There you go. I don't know why I couldn't think of that. Chewie does see a group of Wookiees, and he leaves Han.
Right.
And Han's like, all right, well, go do your thing. And then he goes alone to get the coaxium.
Right. So everybody's doing a little jailbreak kind of revolution on the side whilst the mission is happening. This is bad. Right. So this is this is one of those.
Chewie's back at the same time though. Like the little Wookiee gets there first, and he helps Han first. But then when Han starts pushing the cart again, Chewie is right there helping him push the cart. So yeah, it seemed weird. Like, why is this Wookiee helping Han? But I think Chewie was supposed to be there, and they just didn't have the right camera angles to show that they arrived roughly at the same time.
That makes sense.
I thought Chewie was the first one to come back. He's not.
I forget to be. Doesn't he like like somebody's about to attack Han and he comes at the last
No,
second.
that's the other
or
Wookiee.
something.
That's the other Wookiee.
That's the other one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I hate to be that guy, but all the Wookiees kind of look the same in this movie.
Wow, David. Wait, so do Chewbacca and Han part at this point? Like, is he in the rest of the movie?
Yeah, he meets them back on the
Yeah, he
ship. Like
comes back.
he escapes with them.
Okay,
Yeah.
because that's weird because Han and Chewie have this moment where they say goodbye to each other. It seems very final. You know,
It feels like an Endgame thing, to be honest with you.
Huh.
This whole section.
And it would have been great if that was like, if they plan to continue this further. The
three, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like a really sweet moment, and then Han goes back and gives Chewie whatever he gives him, like a stick or something, a weapon.
That's right.
Yeah.
God, this movie's so weird. I mean, one thing the sequence does really well is the lieutenant's intention carries through. So like everybody knows the plan is to get the coaxium and get out, and everybody separates off to do all these subtasks, but they all keep working toward the lieutenant's intention because they all know where it's going ultimately, and it plays out nicely in that way, in a way that The Last Jedi never manages to, because no one knows what the fuck Holdo's plan is. There's a symmetry and a way that this is handled as a heist that I like, that I think works well.
We skipped over two things at the beginning of this, but Rye, were you going to add something right here at this point?
I was going to say something about I had two things on this. One thing about the droids and another about Kira.
Yeah, go ahead.
On the droids, I think when I watch this, it's potentially problematic that you have L3 and she's like, oh, these droids and restraining bolts. And she takes off the restraining bolts and the droids just run wild. That the idea that that's the only thing that's holding them in check seems like very questionable design decisions were made going into the construction of these
not
droids.
the best move.
Yeah. Yeah, like if you think about like iRobot and the Three Laws, like these, they have robots, they have droids like walking across like the control panels, like shorting out things, letting all the prisoners go, implying that I guess these droids were abused and that they would understand that they've been abused.
Well, let's to explain that, we need to skip back to the original Star Wars movie and look at the fact that 3PO and R2 both had restraining bolts put on them when they were sold because they were stolen robots. They didn't hold any allegiance to their current masters because they were stolen. So we could assume that all of these on Kessel were also all stolen, thus why they had to have the restraining bolts on them.
And doesn't, and now that I think about it, doesn't Jabba tortures droids, doesn't he?
He tortures 3PO. Yeah, the pigmen do, I think.
On Cloud City, we see one of them getting ripped apart. I can't remember about Jabba.
No, I'm talking about. I think it's in
Return. Yeah, because 3PO and R2 go in first, and then he keeps R2 around to serve drinks, and 3PO gets tortured in the back room or something, or vice versa.
I think I think they're like branding the droids' feet.
Yeah, it's something really specific.
I'm pretty sure that's Jedi.
Like it's one of those like really granular, like this thing will never come up again, but we promise this matters type Star Wars moments.
Back then they thought it would never come up again.
And then oopsie doopsie, we got to rewrite.
That's when the one droid tells R2 that he's going to serve on the Master's sailing barge or whatever.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Because when Luke goes to rescue everybody and we have that whole dust up, R2's serving like cocktails because he's got his little arm out with a little tray, which is kind of great. What a weird treatment. It's very strange. What did you have on Kira there, Rye?
So going back to my big thing about establishing skills and stuff. So she, Beckett pulls out the guns and starts shooting people in the control room, and then Kira pulls off some ridiculous move and takes the guy out in the room that she's in.
Some MMA shit.
And you have a bit of lampshading with L3 going whoa, and then Kira saying, what does she say?
It was
that Dryden Voss.
Terrace Kasi was the martial art.
Yeah, and that Dryden Voss had taught her. So
it's meant to be Krav Maga.
You remember my thing about we need to know about the stuff beforehand?
What a weird,
the skills. So there's two things happening here. The first is that this is setting up her fight at the end of the movie.
Yep.
So we know that she can do that when we get there because we saw her do it here. But you also have to establish it for this moment too. And the way that she does that is she attaches it to her background by saying that it was Dryden that taught her. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Like, it's not enough for her to just say, "Oh, I know how to do this." You have to take it and attach it to the background.
So the example that I can't remember which video it's in. It might be the Ray Wookiee one, right? But where you talk about is it in Sicario 2 with the where he knows sign language, and then it falls nicely into his background because it's like his deceased daughter was deaf, which is information we didn't previously know, but it makes perfect sense and solves that problem really neatly. This is trying to do a similar thing, but it doesn't really have any material relationship to the scene it's in. So like, this isn't a sequence where they're in a location where it's mission critical for her to know this skill, and then she suddenly pulls it out of her ass, and we're like, how the fuck does she know how to do that? And she gives us an explanation that deepens her characterization and makes us go, oh yeah, of course, because based on what we know about her previously, that checks out. We've never seen Dryden Voss do kung fu, so this doesn't have that same consistency. There's nothing about Dryden as a rich mob boss who sits in a sailing yacht that suggests to me that he would know how to do this world's version of Krav Maga.
That was what actually one of the two things I wanted to talk about was this exact scene and how it set up her final fight with Dryden, and the fact that he taught her indicates that he is the master, she is the apprentice, right? Mm-hmm. But when they actually fight, it doesn't come off that way. They should have basically both been doing the same moves. Like in many films you see, Equilibrium comes to mind. At the final fight scene, the guys are literally using the same moves on each other because they were both trained in exactly the same way. It should have been very much like that with her fighting Dryden, but it wasn't. Mm-hmm. Granted, they had different weapons, but they didn't seem to move in a similar fashion to me.
What's a really good example of that exact scene is Anakin v Obi-Wan, where they literally try and use the same moves on each other the whole fight. Mm-hmm. It's like Anakin goes back to do a swing, and then Obi-Wan's like, I taught you how to do that, counters it, does the same thing, right? There's even that sequence where they both do a very similar string of sword blows, and they both go to use the Force at the same time, because it's clearly an Obi-Wan move. Like, that shit works really well, because you suddenly go, oh yeah, like, of course they would know the same moves. This dude trained him. And yeah, you're right, there's never that sense in that final fight. And that's just a problem of choreography, maybe, I don't know. We're at the ad time. It's ad break time. Listen, yeah. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about at that point there, Rai, around the kung fu?
I think that was everything.
The only other important thing that I had to point out was at the very beginning when they are going in, and Kira walks up and punches Han in the stomach and gives him the dice. Because we gotta have those dice.
Oh yeah,
we gotta get those dice back in play.
I have that here in my notes, and I have underlined why.
Why? Hey guys.
Because dice,
why?
Because
they're important. Yeah. Don't forget about the dice, you idiots. Remember the dice? Yeah. They aren't going to be plot critical at all. They have nothing to do with the story, whatsoever. Okay, cool. Well, let's pick up as our heroes are kind of escaping Kessel, and then we'll talk about the Kessel run after the break here. Please sit back, put your feet up wherever you are. If you're driving in your vehicle, if you're sitting at work, if you're at the gym, whatever you're doing, enjoy these products or services. Think about them. Think about spending some money. Why don't you? It's about time. You deserve it. We'll be back in a sec. Hey guys, this third episode of Too Much Cowboy is once again sponsored by the Maynard Trigg novel series. They are my low sci-fi fantasy coming-of-age stories, all about the protagonist Maynard Trigg. The dust jacket describes it like this: a powerful debut novel for people who grew up with fantastic stories and are looking for a new world to explore. Maynard Trigg lives a carefree life in the muddied slums of Carthage Skyport, making mischief at the expense of his loving father, his friends, and teachers. But when a pirate appears, claiming to have been sent to protect Maynard from a murderous creature, he is thrust into a life of magic, theft, and deceit. A life he promised himself he would never pursue. This is Maynard Trigg if you're not convinced by that, go check out the Goodreads page. There are tons of reviews from people that loved reading it. It's one of my favorite things we've ever done. There are currently 2 books out and a third on the way in about 6 or 9 months' time. Maynardtrig.com and use code Cowboy10 at checkout. That is code Cowboy10 at checkout for 10% off your first paperback order. Once again, that is Maynardtrig.com and coupon code Cowboy10 at checkout for 10% off your first paperback order. All right, welcome back for that brief ad break. Whatever you advertised, I hope it was good. I hope they were high quality ads. Sometimes they're not. You never bloody know. But we live in capitalism, don't we, guys? So we were just saying in the ad break that the one thing we didn't talk about was L3's death. So I might just set the table for this one and then kick to Danielle to maybe kind of start us talking about this. So our crew is escaping the mines of Kessel. Han and Chewbacca have the coaxium, and Chewbacca kind of gets it onto the ship. And Han and Lando are sort of, with Kira's help, fighting off the attackers in a very spectacular action sequence. It's very cool visually. The way that they use the smoke and the particle effects and the lasers and the water and the steam and like the smoke, like the whole thing is very cool looking. We get one of our first uses of a thermal detonator in the main series, and it's fucking sick. Kira's just chucking them left and right. It's very, very cool. And in the midst of this, L3 kind of emerges, fighting off the Imperials there. She kind of emerges and is fighting her way back, and she gets fatally wounded. She goes down. Lando rushes in to save her, and sort of like jumps in and does some cool. He's like bang, 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 and then he kind of rolls up and he's kind of cradling her in his arms. And Han is like, Lando, what the fuck are you doing? And then Lando kind of charges in after him, and kind of drags the two of them back to the ship. And they all sort of get on, and manage to escape safely. But this death sequence here, now she's on the ship and she's kind of dying, and Lando holds her in his arms, and we get this kind of goodbye with L3. Danielle, talk to me about this death sequence.
So I think more than anything, at least a focus for me about this death sequence was I actually knew that this was coming. Even though I didn't intend to see Solo, I had watched a video essay on droids, and they had mentioned this scene, so I knew it was coming. So it's just sort of anticipating it and when it was going to happen. So in that way, it wasn't surprising. But the thing that I knew what was coming was sort of where this leads for L3, and sort of the tension between her wanting to liberate droids and her fate at the end of this. Because with her expert navigation system, she becomes part of the ship, and essentially is why they call the ship a she. And the tension here being that she's sort of fighting for the droids' freedom and their choice to be liberated, and she has the exact opposite fate, and then the heroes just think this is okay. We could go all over, like, many directions here, but it feels like this is just another example of the film seeming to try to do something but not really following through with it, not committing to it. And it's just kind of feels like fan service as well, the bad kind.
It's a callback to, it's either A New Hope or Empire, with the 3PO says that R2, either him or R2 talks to the computer system on the Falcon and says it was rude. Is that what he says, Darth?
Yeah. And I want to say it said something about having an odd dialect.
Yeah, I think.
Interesting. So that was them trying to fill in another. This is how we got here.
So no, you're exactly right. It's fan service.
But it's a really interesting point that Danielle brings up is, would that be something L3 wanted? Would she feel that she was now permanently enslaved because she never gave her permission to be a part of the Falcon like that? But then other people would say, we saved your life. Why aren't you thankful? I mean...
Right.
Okay.
I think it's just like this nebulous portion of her consciousness got integrated. So it's not like her mind is trapped in the ship. It's like, the part that's useful got trapped, which is the navigation, and
Right,
then
but the rest of us dead.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's in the second Pirates of the Caribbean movie where there's people that are like part of the ship, like they're when you become
Part of the ship, part of the crew.
part of the ship, part of the crew. It has a bit of that vibe where it's like we saved your life. Why aren't you thankful
Right.
that you're an indentured servant on this ship?
But it's like not good though.
It's
like
not
right,
good,
Will
though.
Turner.
Yeah.
Like that sucks. He can't see his wife and stuff. He has to be at sea all the time.
Right. L3 can't do the sex with Lando.
Lando will find a way.
Lando would just fuck the exhaust
Yeah.
pipe, wouldn't he? Yeah. He doesn't give a shit.
It works.
Oh,
It just works.
Sorry. It feels bad. It feels bad as a resolution for this character, but it gives us the setup we need to answer the question of, you guys can't do the Kessel Run. No one's ever done the Kessel Run in that quick of a time. There's no navigational system that's that good, and there's no ship that's that fast. Well, suddenly we have a ship that is that fast and has that good of a navigational system. So from a plot perspective,
right.
That raised an interesting question to me. Is it's never really explained why she has such a good navigational system, because generally you can't map something until you've been there. There is no chance that she had ever been to the mall before to know what it was and to map it. So how did she map it?
it also raises, I mean, that is a really interesting point that raises another issue that I've never thought about, which is if this is the kind of primary source of coaxium in this sector, why don't the Imperials have like a proper procedure for getting this out of there? Like, how do they get it out normally?
Well, they have a path, don't they?
This right, what you're saying right there is my enormous world building problem for this movie. Is that when they're like, all right, well, we need a source of unrefined coaxium, and she says the exact line is the only astatic source that exists is under a spice mine on Kessel. So I don't know if that's different than something else, or maybe that's the only one that isn't controlled by the Imperials.
Yeah, because they did say there was an Imperial
still
controlled
doesn't
one,
make
which
sense.
was the same planet that was in Rogue One at the very end. I'm blanking on the name.
Oh.
Scarif.
Well, they're
she
talking
said there was
about-
one on Scarif.
Yeah, but they're talking about refined coaxium.
This is unrefined.
And then Han suggests, well, what about unrefined
So that-
coaxium? And then she says, there's only one source of that, which if there was only one source for this fuel that you need to dominate the galaxy, no, it would not be run by a criminal syndicate. The Imperials would 100%
And you'd have more
control
guys
that.
on it, probably. Like, I'd have like a few I'd have a lot of guns there.
Yeah.
I'd have the whole system it's in locked down completely. Like, this is, like in a Western story, this is the fort where there's like the mini guns and they've got the grenades and they have the horses and the sniper rifles. Like, this is the fortified area. This is just, they just let it be run by this like weird kind of offshoot with very little protection. And I guess in their defense, they do get a Star Destroyer that does appear kind of in the Kessel Run itself. But
Why are they not there
already? This speaks to what we talked about last time, which is that the sense that these are real places, the sense that these are places that have existed. It feels like they went, okay, we need a cool heist, and we need to explain the Kessel Run and where that came from, because that's a famous Star Wars thing. What do we put here? Instead of what story are we telling and what could we use? Like what happens with Luke, it's like, no. Well, the Kessel Run needs to be in it. So how do we manufacture a situation where Kessel and the run is happening? It feels like the wrong way round to have come to this as a solution, and you can feel it in the text.
One interesting way that we could look at it is that the Empire did have control of it, because they had a Star Destroyer there that could stop anything from getting out unless they wanted it out. And a way of ensuring that you have control is to make the public think that they have a little bit of control, so then they don't really feel like rebelling. So if the Empire is able to say, oh, you have this mine over here, we're not in control of that mine, quote unquote. So now they have a source of coaxium that they could go out and they could sell, whether it's on the black market or just sell to the general public. and now the general public is like, oh, the Empire isn't that bad. They're letting us have this little piece over here. But when in reality, the Empire still has their ship there immediately as soon as a problem pops up.
Well, if it was a source of coaxium, I would buy into that. But if it's the source of coaxium, then no, they would, no, screw your freedom or your implication of freedom. Like, we are absolutely locking this down.
Yeah.
Playing
Would
dice
be-
with God a
would
little
be how
bit
that
to not
would
have
go.
that completely secured.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but
that this like one little ship can just waltz in there and steal a bunch of coaxium like that. Yeah, that's a problem. But I would say that in defense of the fan servicey bit of this is, I thought they took a very creative way to resolve the problem of Han's original statement that we all like to make fun of is, what is it? This ship did the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs, or it's like, isn't that a unit of distance, not time? Yeah, so which it is, and so they resolve that by like him taking the shortcut.
Right.
But and then going back to what you were saying about L3, that was a big question that I had, which isn't really going into the beginning of the sequence, which is a problem. Is they're like, oh, we need her navigation computer, and I'm thinking, well, isn't that just maps and other stuff? So we're going into an area that nobody's been in, that is in a constant state of flux. What good is a navigational computer going to do you? And it's not until the end of the sequence where they're like, oh, L3's computer is mapping where we need to go, or scanning the system and figuring out where we need to go. Yeah. And that happens at the end, though. It doesn't happen at the beginning. So throughout this sequence, I still have that question.
And another really interesting point that her being integrated with the ship brings up is another video that Film Theory did, and it definitely deserves a watch if you haven't seen it, because he basically breaks down the fact that there is a lot of evidence that shows that Han Solo cannot actually fly, and it's L3 that's doing all of the flying for the Falcon in the original trilogy. It's really interesting, but it shows how important it is when you are building up the backstory in a prequel like this, that every little decision can have major implications later on if you don't fully think out how these things are being integrated with the existing storyline.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And this is part of why what we talked about in the very first episode of this kind of little mini series here is that, like when you have directors like Lord and Miller who are real like improv-y and making this fun picture, they are going to tread on things that matter to this story making sense. But it feels like they, instead of what should have happened, which is they got Ron Howden to finish this off and he tightened up those bolts, it feels like he just came in and he went, let's just take out all the improv. And then they didn't bother to tighten up any of the other nuts or bolts that are at play here. So the Kessel Run itself is essentially they're following the path until they come into there's a Star Destroyer in the way, and they can't get past it. And there's a great line where I think Han's like, don't worry, it's not like they're gonna send out TIE fighters. They can't afford to waste them on a ship our size. Then they immediately send out TIE fighters. Great little moment. But basically what they end up doing is they're gonna take the shortcut, right? They're gonna use this navigational situation to cut through the Maw. We don't really know what that is. And then we get one of the weirdest sequences I've ever seen in Star Wars, aside from the Raptors in The Force Awakens, where we're in this kind of black space fog, and there is just this like eldritch space creature.
Space Cthulhu, yeah.
A space Cthulhu.
So good.
It's just so. And then what is sucking it in? Is there's like a black hole? Or there's like a something.
Yeah, it's like like a black hole.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah,
the Maw
and so
is.
Han
The gravity
tricks this space Cthulhu into getting caught into its gravitational well, and he's like, haha, I'm very clever. Isn't this a really smart move? And he does it, and then he's like, fuck, now we're stuck in it, and they're using all of their energy to get themselves moving forward. And this is what I really like about this sequence is that everybody on the crew is involved in getting them out of this. Like, they don't just give up. They're not like, oh, we should wait for something to happen. They proactively are like, okay, quick, get this to the fuel line. Like, there is this, he's like, okay, if we inject it straight here, we can do it. Kira's doing this thing. Chewbacca's doing this. Han's doing this. Beckett's like sprinting into the ship to go and plug in the fuel. Like everybody's involved in this effort to escape this big gravity well. And they do some, I'm sure Darth or Rye, you might remember specifically what it is, but they inject coaxium directly into the hyperfuel line or something.
The into the
something
or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know. The cool thing about the sequence that you're talking about is all of that stuff is happening, and you still get these little character moments too, where what is it? They need to do something, and Chewie just reaches up and flips a bunch of switches, and they're like, "Well, wait a minute," and he's like, "Oh, you're 190 years old," and then so Kira's like, "All right, well, you sit in the seat." Fan servicey moment. The theme plays as Chewie sits down. And then she runs back to help Lando and grabs one of his capes to put out a fire, at which he objects to because it's his favorite cape.
So
Did you see the hilarious thing about Chewie right there, though? Like, as soon as Chewie sits down in that seat, the headlights of the ship turn on. Han was literally driving without the headlights on in pitch black.
That's so good.
That's so funny. Oh, what a nice little touch. This feels like the film at its best.
Yeah.
And this clockwork sequence of them getting it working feels like a Lord and Miller sequence. Like everything is firing off in perfect symmetry. And it has this like rhythm to it where it's like, do this, bang, character moment, do that, bang, character moment. Like it just feels very good. And this is when the movie, this is when I'm in.
The whole sequence is a digression from the plot too, so totally
Absolutely.
as if it's improv. Yeah.
Oh, it feels like improv, but it's fine-tuned. Everything is firing on all cylinders.
Which is what they do best. It's like improv, but very planned out improv.
Yes. It feels like the way that every episode of Firefly feels, but the way that you remember it feeling, not the way it actually is, which is like just a pretty good TV drama, right? Like it achieves the thing it's looking for in a way that's brilliant. It's very, very good. Does anybody have anything else they want to touch on with this sequence? We could talk about the Space Cthulhu if you guys want. I don't know. I feel like it's just going to make us sad because it's the worst part of the sequence, despite how good this sequence is.
I mean, like,
What the space monster?
props to the VFX team. Like that shit looks dope.
The whole
When he gets like how its skin comes off when it's getting sucked in.
it's very gross.
Yeah.
It looks very cool.
I had
The only thing that I would say.
Go ahead, Ray.
Well, actually, no. I have two things on that. Darth, you want to go first?
So the thought that I had wasn't necessarily just about the monster because they mentioned it earlier on. They say, "What is making all that sound as they're flying in through the tunnel?" And they said that it's spacebergs crashing together, right? And they said there's nothing out there but vacuum-breathing life forms. And I cannot wrap my mind around what a vacuum-breathing life.
What is that
form
sentence? It's just things that they drink, they breathe vacuum, not air. You guys get it.
Yeah.
Right?
They expel air.
They expel air and they
breathe
drink
in
vacuum.
Yeah.
What's to get, Darth? It's just science.
So the reverse trees, I guess.
You know how fish breathe water and we breathe air? It's like that, but with space. I literally think that's as much as they think.
Well, see, like it's to me, it makes sense that you could through space mumbo jumbo, you could have a being that exists in a nebula, because or it feeds on the hydrogen,
gassy,
or
the black gassy
carbon
stuff, yeah.
bergs or whatever. But to call it vacuum breathing, well, I mean, I suppose you have like the Purgles too, right?
The what? Sorry.
The Purgles from Rebels, they're called Purgles. The space whales that are capable of hyperspace travel.
I'm not caught up, but I mean every science fiction series pretty much has some kind of space something that could live out there. But I had always just assumed that those things don't need to breathe because that makes way more sense to me than that they breathe vacuum, which is nothing.
But it's not. There's no molecules in it. Like this, you can.
There's nothing out there.
Breathe. Breathing is like a physiological action. Like it doesn't.
What? Maybe they're breathing. It's antimatter.
No, that's not. This antimatter isn't. It's the absence of matter. It's not
dark,
the opposite.
Dark
it's
energy.
Still a thing.
They're breathing.
They could
dark
breathe
energy
dark matter, I guess. Okay, they could breathe dark matter, but it's not a vacuum. It's not a vacuum. They're not breathing vacuum. If you know what I mean? Like it's different. Like dark matter is like is a quantity that you could point to. It has mass. We just don't know what it is. Like that's a thing that exists. A vacuum is not that. A vacuum is the absence of everything. There's no dark matter in the vat. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense, Pat.
I'll get Mitchie to elaborate on this. He can probably tell us.
Someone call a physicist because I'm gonna fucking herniate. This stuff really annoys the shit out of me because it's such an unnecessary piece of dialogue. You could have called it anything else and it wouldn't have raised any flags. Exactly what Rye's
What
saying.
made you the most upset in Solo?
It's actually a three-way tie, I think, between a few items.
It's not robosexual Lando. It's vacuum breathing.
It's vacuum breathing space whales. I think I'm more comfortable with Lando fucking robots, to be honest.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. Okay. Look, don't kink shame me.
Don't look at David Searchers.
Don't kink shame me. I'm just into. Listen, they got lots of moving parts. All right, there's lots of opportunities for friction.
Super dynamic. Yeah.
Is a. All right. Yeah. Look, I hate it with I was fine with it when we glanced over it, but now that you've reminded me of that line, Darth, I hate it. Yeah, I did. Brian, you had some stuff. You had two things on this?
Well, but the first one was exactly what Darth said, that they do prep us that there is or L3 does prepare us for something to be out there earlier on. So that's fine. The second one is the way that he distracts the vacuum breathing space whale into the maw that's the fan servicey bit of this, because that's the escape pod. That's missing.
Oh, I hate that. It's been like how many years between this and? Oh no, it's actually pretty close, right? It's like a few months between this and A New Hope.
Is it?
I don't think that's. I think it's a while
So
still.
what I'm saying is like they probably would have replaced the escape pod. It seems like
But
a
the
pretty
interesting
important
thing is that Lando says that he had a escape pod installed, so it hasn't been there that long. Like when they're first going into the impound lot,
when
and Lando is
when
going
he
through all
got
of the
it, it didn't
modifications
have
that he's made to the ship. I'm pretty darn sure that one of the things he said was, I had an escape pod installed.
Well, at least they're setting that up for later.
So it's custom.
Yeah.
Well, because like when they do the overhead nostalgia shot with the theme, when the theme plays, when they first go to the Falcon, you could see it's you look at it and go like, wait a minute, that's not how the Millennium Falcon looks like, because it has the part in the middle.
See, that's almost clever.
But okay, so the escape pod is at the front of the ship, which is the worst place to put an escape pod, in my opinion.
Yeah, if you're crashing, that's not the direction you want to go.
Oh, wait, that actually brings up something that I've really been interested to talk about, which is picture where the cockpit is on the Falcon.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the extreme right-hand side, right?
Yep.
Like, it's almost literally tacked onto the right side of the ship. So he has like 200 feet of ship to his left. How can they drive anywhere and have any sense of how big the ship is without running into anything?
I built the Falcon in there's a space game called Empyrean. I don't know if you guys heard of that, but I built my version of the Falcon in that game, and it is impossible to fly that thing in anything other than third person.
Yeah.
Because you can't see 90% of the ship. You
Seems like a
cannot
huge
see it.
design flaw.
Yeah.
And a good probably 45, 50 degrees of your forward vision is obscured by what's immediately to your
You know
left.
what they need is like a big, like a giant pole with a giant mirror so you can see the rest of the ship while you're flying. Like one of those curved mirrors. Yeah, what?
Or the backup cameras you get on the fancy SUVs.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
go.
Yeah, exactly. The huge wing mirrors. Yeah. It's a weird design ship, and it seems like it'd be hard to fly. But maybe that's why you need a really good navigational droid, is because the ship is designed very poorly. I don't know.
And a co-pilot.
And a co-pilot who's also a Chewbacca. Yeah, but look, ultimately we do escape, right? So we get away from Kessel, and we head to Savareen. Savareen? Is that how you pronounce it?
Ooh, let's pause before we get there, because I think Rye is really gonna like this thought that I had, because it's all about the realism and setting up something that's about to happen. So during this whole entire chase, the whole thing is that the coax is getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and it's going to blow up, right?
Mm-hmm.
They never turned down the air conditioning. Like, they could have done something. They could have filled, they could have put ice around. They could have done something at the very least. Turning down the environmental controls so that all of them have to put on coats, so that all of them have obvious frost, coming out when they breathe. All of that would have given life to the fact that they are trying to keep this hot matter cool, leading up to them crash landing on the planet and getting it offloaded.
You would also set up
That
some
would've been
interesting
cool.
interesting character moments, like maybe Chewbacca and Lando. Maybe Chewbacca can give Lando a bit of a cuddle. Maybe Kira and Han can get a bit cozy. You know what I'm saying? Like we could get some you know what I'm saying?
They
Also,
get Lando's many capes. And put 'em over.
Lando could wear 37 capes at once.
that'd be good.
Yeah.
That could work if you did, because this is the climax of the second act, I guess, going into, because Savarine's all the third. But because I was thinking, what you could do is you could take the character moment with Han and Kira and move it to here where they're like super cold or whatever. But structurally, that doesn't really work. Like that would be. So the whole point of the coaxium heating up is that's just the ticking clock that they have to beat to add tension or whatever. So I'm fine with it as it is, but them taking extra steps to try to cool it or buy themselves a little more time, that demonstrates the ingenuity and problem solving, which I really like to see and creativity, which I really like to see in characters. Or I like those moments when they happen.
It's a really good thought, Darth. I think there's a lot of room there for some interesting, not just world building, but like also the character and the plot, kind of that multi-purpose storytelling that we keep talking about not seeing in this story. So we head to Savarine, and this is kind of This is actually a really good place to wrap up this episode, because this is as Rye was saying, this is the downbeat of the end of the second act, and we're then going to go into the third act where we now have a new problem to overcome. But essentially, what's happening here is the Falcon's pretty roughed up by its experience in the Maw, and what we're going to do is we're going to kind of head into Savarine and kind of crash land at the docks there, and sort of rush in to kind of store this coaxium, this unrefined coaxium, as quickly as possible to make sure it doesn't kind of explode. Now, remind me, are they refining it? The Savarines, are they refining it on this planet, or is it still unrefined?
Yeah, that's the refinery.
They are.
Mm-hmm.
They are.
And we have this little downbeat where the refining's happening, and we get a little like Kira Han moment where he's like, what are we gonna, she's like, what are you gonna do next once you get your payoff? And then they have this little back and forth, and Kira says, well, who are you, right? And Han has this little smirk, and he replies, I'm an outlaw. And Kira thinks it's kind of funny because she can really see that he's a good guy, but it's a cute little character moment, and I'm just ready for these two crazy kids to get together, guys. And yeah, it's a cute little moment they have, but of course it can't last for long, as Emphasis, I cannot say this name. Emphasis? Emphas arrives, having tracked the team from Vandor, and we kind of get this a Mexican standoff, kind of, where it's like the Cloud Riders, they're like, listen, they turn up, and suddenly Beckett's like, okay, let me do all the talking, don't even worry about this, guys, I've got this. And Han gives his best Beckett impression, and it's fucking terrible. He's like, you don't want to mess with us, we've got a ship full of troopers on that boat right there, they're gonna come in, and you don't want to mess with us right now. And then Lando takes off and leaves, and Han just kind of steps back in line, and he's like, okay, do your thing. And this is where we get the reveal that she and her crew are rebels that are trying to strike back at the Syndicate and the Empire. And this is our hook. It's the end of our second act and the inciting incident for our third. Does anybody have any thoughts on this little sequence before we kind of wrap up this episode?
I have a bunch of thoughts on this.
Good, let's do it. Good, let's do it.
I mean, I don't know if you want to save it for the next one or just do a little bit. I have
Yeah,
one thing
give me
here
one
that
quick one.
I could
Yeah.
throw in at the tail end if you want to save most of the Savarine stuff
Mm-hmm.
for later. But the little bit where Beckett starts to talk to Emphas and says, he leads off, and then Han jumps in and goes, "We got 80,000 guys down there, and all I got to do is snap my fingers," and then you turn and the ship just takes off with a nice bit of comic relief. But this is, I think, something that has happened repeatedly to Han throughout the movie, where at various points, I want to say, I'm trying to think how many different scenes it happens in, because there's several where he talks a big game and then is immediately wrong, or immediately shown to be bluffing. Because it happens in the beginning with Proxima with the grenade. Oh, that's just a rock, and then it happens with Lando in the card.
It happens
game,
with
I
Beckett
think.
and the blackmail. It happens.
Yeah.
It happens with Sabbac. It happens on. Does it happen on Kessel? I don't think it does.
I think it
I'm trying to
does.
think. Yeah, it happens to him very often. And there's like immediate ramifications as well.
Yeah.
It's
So I thought that was just something that occurred to me while we were talking, but like I thought that was an interesting little thing about his character.
That does also kind of happen in A New Hope a lot, where he's like, "Here's my plan. Here's how it's going to go down," and then it immediately goes wrong. Like multiple times in that movie, where he's like, "It's fine. We'll go down the garbage chute. It'll be fine." And it's like, okay, it's super not fine. This was a bad idea. Like just repeated, constant. Everything he pitches goes wrong. It's very, very good characterization. Yeah, I like it. Does anybody have anything they want to say at the end of this one before we kind of wrap up?
Well, since you were relating back to the original trilogy, the line that was fan service but also was kind of good fan service was right before Lando tells him, "I'm going to go wait in my ship." Lando looks at Han and says, "I hate you," and Han says, "I know."
Because you guys remember
I remember.
you remember Star Wars? and then she say, "I love you," and he said, "I know." It's just like in Star Wars, because this is Star Wars.
Oh,
Yeah,
snap.
she says the thing, and he does the
Guys,
thing. He did
Star
the thing
Wars.
that he does.
Also,
Yeah.
I love that little joke where Han's like telling that dude, "Oh, I just made the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs," and then Chewie growls and he's like, "Well, it is if you round down."
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, it's
And one last thing that I want to make clear before we wrap up today is that I like this movie.
I think we all do, right?
I want that to be clear.
I really like the getting to Kessel, doing the heist, and getting out of Kessel. I really like that sequence. That is like pitch perfect, except for the kung fu thing, which has broken my brain, and the air breathing vacuum monsters. But like everything else is, aside from those two details, I think it's really, really, really well done. This is exactly what Rye was talking about in our first episode. Is like this movie's good when it gets going. It's just that it takes a really long time to get going, and then it's still hampered by the struggles it has in that first kind of act, and its difficulty with its own material. I also really like this movie. I think we can all kind of agree that like.
I don't think that's been clear in everything that we've gone over.
Yeah, it goes without saying that we like it enough to talk about it for this long. I think that should speak volumes.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, just because, look, like, I gotta say, because I told David I have to say it like in every episode I'm on the podcast, but I love the Kingdom Hearts video games, but I'll critique them to no end. Like, so, and I could go on for hours doing that. So just because, you're critiquing something a lot doesn't mean that you dislike it, or that you think it's bad necessarily. Because we do like this movie, it seems.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. I'll still never play Kingdom Hearts, and you'll never make me, Danielle, but keep trying. It's been
What
about...
if Star Wars is in it one day?
Ooh.
Not that I want that,
Ooh,
but...
Interesting. It's been about, for your reference, it's been about a year and a half, and Danielle has been trying to convince me at least once a month, or reminding me like, hey, Kingdom Hearts is a thing, you should play it.
If you don't try it, you'll never know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know. I know. Yeah. Well, look, that's gonna do it for this episode. This has been. This is quite a fun one because we got to talk about stuff we liked. I think when we get together next time, we talk about the third act and the kind of way this movie wraps up. It's a lot of good stuff. It's a lot of things that work really well. But there are still a lot of questions and flags that the first 2 acts have raised that need a lot of work to be resolved. And I'm very excited for us to kind of talk about how that all shakes out. So that will probably do it for this episode. We might just go around, and if everybody just wants to quickly tell the audience where they can be found on the internet, if there's any kind of current projects you want to point to, or anything that you wanted to promote. So I might start with you, Pat. Where can people find you?
I run a film analysis podcast with my friend Mitchie. It's called A Method to the Madness. Our website is amttm.com. Right now we're making our way through the Breaking Bad series, and we're covering every single episode, so that's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to peer pressure you into doing an episode on Casino Royale, which I'll be on.
Yeah, I'll definitely do that.
So keep an eye out for that. I've been on a few. We did Social Network, which is good. Yeah, really, really great podcast. And I've been working my way through the Breaking Bad edition. It's very, very fun. Danielle, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me over at levelstory.net. That's where the magazine is, where we critique stories and video games. Critique and celebrate, I should say. Mm-hmm. Or you can head over to my personal blog, which is thisisdanielle.net.
Love it. And both of these cats also have articles on zeroindent.com. If you want to jump in there and kind of read their thoughts about various things, it's the best place to go find those. Darth, where can people find you on the internet?
I am on the infamous YouTube. You can just search Darth_D and you will find me. Generally, I'm doing video essays, which I have several scripts that are in the editing process, and I've got a couple parody edits in the works as well, because sea shanties are a thing now, and I love them.
Yeah, good stuff. Rye, where can people find you on the old internet?
You can find me also on YouTube. It's Ryebold, Ryebold, and I talk. I would like to talk about something other than Star Wars, but so far I haven't gotten around. I haven't finished yet. I have a lot more to say.
Yeah, I think we're all in that boat at the moment. I've realized I didn't think I had much to say about Star Wars, and then doing this, I'm like, I have a lot to say about Star Wars. Love it. If you want to find everything that we do, zeroindent.com is the best place to do that. We are an independent media crit publication. We are funded by readers and viewers and listeners. If you would like to participate and help us keep doing what we do, patreon.com /zeroindent is the... Wow. You guys did such good plugs, and I can't even talk. You can head to patreon.com /zeroindent to support us from as little as $1 a month. You can get access to all kinds of extra stuff. You get these episodes a week early already as you're listening to this. When you're hearing this on YouTube, the whole mini series will be out on Patreon, so you could be listening to next week's episode right now, so you can go check that out. Otherwise, you can find everything else I do at maynardtrig.com. Those are my kind of my fantasy novel series. If you like the stories we tell and the kinds of stories we talk about, you'll probably like those books. The second one is out right now. Pat is pointing to the display in the background. You can absolutely go and check that out. Thank you guys again for joining me for another deep dive into Solo. I think next episode will be kind of our concluding. We'll wrap up the third act, and then we'll probably spend a bit of time reflecting and talking about our thoughts and feelings on this one. Please go check out everybody who was involved today in the last few weeks of these episodes. Everybody here is extremely talented and makes really cool content. But we'll see you guys in the next one to talk about the conclusion of the story. We're gonna get some fun gunfights. We're gonna get some double crossing, some triple crossing. We're gonna get some more cowboy stuff, and then we're gonna talk a lot about what the hell this movie is trying to say for itself as it wraps itself into a conclusion. So we'll catch you guys then. Thank you as always for listening or watching. We'll see you then.
See ya.
Thanks for watching this episode of Too Much Cowboy. You have our patrons to thank for this series. Big shout outs to Cameron and you Poomans, our top Patreon supporters. You can join them by heading to patreon.com /zeroindent and contributing to our independent media publication. If you'd like to see more from us or more of this show and you're listening on the Too Much Cowboy podcast feed, you can either head to youtube.com /zeroindent or look up Backtrack Behind the Creators wherever you find your podcasts to listen to more.